Welcome back to the Rich Marriage Podcast with Jason Hall and Jennifer Hall. We're excited to be back with you today. Today we're going to be sharing about a very pivotal moment in our lives and in our marriage as the Lord called us to move from our hometown, a place where I only knew as home. Jason had been, lived in a couple of other places throughout his life, but we called home. I called home, family, friends, everybody there, my foundation there, my family, that the Lord called us to move from our hometown in Maryland, 1,400 miles away to Texas. So we're going to share with you this story, how it came about. I know when I first caught wind of it, it was actually about 9 years before it happened or so.
Oh, wow.
That, do you remember that day?
Yeah, so 9 years before. Yeah, I remember it vaguely, but to be honest, it didn't impact me. It wasn't real. I just feel one day I said to Jennifer, one day I think we're going to move to Texas, but I didn't think she believed me.
It was very
kind of
very casual. Yes. Very casual, y'all. And I was just like, what? And as he said, he didn't harp on it or anything. And I didn't really, I was just like, yeah, whatever. Jason says stuff sometimes. Yeah, I'm like, okay, whatever. But it got really real, y'all. That was about 2000, maybe 8 or so. Yeah. It got really real in about 2011, I want to say. Several years later, this theme of moving to Texas took over our lives. It was almost like, I call it a haunting. Everywhere we looked up, everywhere we, in our sleep, in our dreams, throughout our day, it was almost kind of like this thought, this drawing. That's the word we use, and that's what we oftentimes share. This drawing to move grew stronger and stronger to the point where it kind of overtook us. It was something that we could no longer ignore.
Yeah, I remember. It's so funny you say that because I literally be driving on the road and I see Texas tags on the license plates, but we were living in Maryland. So, and then like you said, even dreams and visions, and it was just this overwhelming, you're supposed to do this. And mind you, we didn't plan to move at all. We looked at our lives as we're going to live in Maryland for the rest of our lives. We're going to work in D.C., try to have a successful career. And that was our goals, have our kids and have a happy life. But this was a huge interjection. This was outside of our comfort, our sphere. I mean, everything that we could ever imagine.
And it was probably at the worst time. One of the worst times in our marriage and our family. I mean, as we shared before, we were stuck in survival mode for so long, living paycheck to paycheck. It wasn't everything was this is a great time to move. It was probably the worst time in the natural for us to move. We had, roots, so many roots in the ground. As we said, our families were there. We were heavily involved in ministry as well. Our friends, our community was there. And so it would hit me hard. I don't know, Jason too, but I think it hit me hard. I was just kind of really struggling with it. But as we said, it was something that we really couldn't ignore, right? We realized that our lives were getting ready to change forever. And there was so many unknowns. We had no clue what this was going to look like. We had no clue of the how. We really had no clue of the when even at that point. But it was something that kind of took over our lives. It really consumed us to the point where we had to pursue okay, Lord, what is this? So what is that? You remember back, what was kind of our first step, thinking back, man, we knew it was something. Jason was in school at the time.
Yeah,
which is pretty cool. We also knew that it wasn't just for us. It wasn't just for our family, but he was calling us here for a purpose. So we even started to dream about what that might look like. And it was a perfect timing for that. As Jason was in school, he had the opportunity to actually write and do one of his assignments on what it might look like to actually build and launch and serve here in Texas. So we also did that. We wrote it down and we made it plain.
Yes.
Which is huge. I know in Habakkuk too, it talks about writing it down and making it plain. And that's something that we did early on as this came about. We wrote it down, we made it plain, but we also took some vision and prayer trips down here.
Yeah, that was huge, man. I have to mention that we intentionally, before we did the move and all that, we intentionally flew out to Houston, Texas, stayed in a hotel. We literally drove a rental car all around Houston. Now, mind you, for those that know Houston,
it's huge.
Man, it's huge. And I was like, well, wait a minute, we're driving 2 hours and we're still in Houston, and I didn't realize it's like the size bigger than Pittsburgh, and the third largest city in the country. I didn't even know all that, to be honest with you.
Which made it more scary to me.
It was scary for the movie. No, you're exactly right. So when we came out here, we literally drove the car and prayed and asked God, like, what area in Houston? Give us more specifics. And we started talking to a realtor. We started talking to different people in the area, connecting to people in ministry. And we realized that, we narrowed on, God showed us this city in Katy, Texas, where we currently reside still 8 years later now. And we realized that there was a certain grace that God has given us there. There were certain people that we were supposed to meet, right? I believe that when God calls you to a location, he gives you a grace for that location. He gives you specific relationships. He gives you an assignment. And that's what we had, right? We didn't realize that this was going to be huge for our life. This was going to change everything. Now, don't get me wrong. What happened in year one? Because I expected when I came here that everything would go great. Like it would just be a move and our marriage would be better, our money would be better, our family would be better. But what really happened when we got here? Because
it was more like a broke marriage than a rich marriage. Yeah, we did realize again, we had the faith, and people had spoken so many things. There was so much encouragement as far as what it was going to be like and what this meant for us in our lives. This move, we knew it was God, so we knew it was going to be good. Right? Anything that God does is good. And so the first year, though, was the hardest. It was the hardest thing. One of the hardest things that we've ever endured. We didn't know anybody. We didn't really have much, to grasp onto in moving here. Okay, we're like, okay, God, you told us to come. Now we've come. We've been obedient. We're here. Now what? And there wasn't a what for a really long time. Jason ended up working a job that he despised. He was in a really bad place, just discouraged. Financially, we were really struggling. Our kids were always sick with the change in the climate and the weather. I mean, everything was just kind of like closing in on us as we're sitting here in this new city, as we packed up, moved what we could fit in this little U-Haul, y'all. We didn't really have the funds to move. And we did it. And we get here and it was like crickets. And everything was like falling to pieces. It was the hardest time that we ever had. But again, we never questioned whether or not it was God that told us to come. Sometimes in your marriage, in your life, it's going to require you to move. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a physical move like it was for us to move 1,400 miles away from our home. But there's going to be a move that's required, a shift, a pivot sometimes within your life. And if you know it's God, again, you can know that it's good. But it doesn't mean that you're not going to endure some things, that you're not going to go through some things, and that it's going to be this rich life and this rich marriage off the top. You're going to have to go through. And that's what we had to do. We had to endure. We had to go through some things. But we never lost hope and sight and faith that this was God. And we can look up 8 years later, right? And you may want to go back. There's so many things that happen. And we can say, oh my goodness, like, Lord, like, look what you have done. What if we had not moved? We go back often. Like, we can't imagine what our lives would look like, what our marriage would look like if we had not been obedient to go on this Abraham journey and go to the land that I'm sending you.
Man, that's huge. You know, I have to say that there was one particular evening about a year in that after the move, and I was laying in the bed and I was just tired, you know, from work and all those different things. And, you know, Jennifer came in the room and I'm like, oh, hey. And I was like, we need to go back. We need to go back. Like, we need to move back to Maryland because this was it, y'all. Like, I was done. I was depressed, defeated. I didn't have any hope. You know, here's the thing, that's the crazy part. I still believe God sent us there, but I lost hope that he would perform what he said he would do. So there was that element of my faith that was lost. It was hard, you know, and when the interesting thing is when she looked at me, she said, we are not going back. And I was like, well, wait a minute. And I'm like, in my mind, but I stayed quiet. That's what my mind was saying, but my spirit was just jumping and leaping. But it was like, we're supposed to stay. I couldn't argue the point. And the one thing I'll never forget what she said. She said, we need to see this thing through. We need to see what God has. Now, mind you, she had an opportunity where she could have gone back to her family. Her mother is her closest friend. So this was huge. She could have took advantage of my vulnerable moment. But this was an opportunity to be obedient even in the trial, even in the tribulation. The strength that we have now comes from the trials. That's where the greatness of marriage comes. That's where our rich marriage came from, the trial and the tribulation to make us stronger. The Bible says, glory in your sufferings. That's powerful. Like when Paul said that, he said, glory in your sufferings. And that's just what we did.
We did.
We gloried in our suffering. It was so hard. It's so hard.
Hardest thing.
It's so hard.
It was. I think it was the point, though, where we realized, like you said, that it was in our struggles. It was in the trials. It was in the hard that the heavenly things, the things that he had promised were going to come through, right? We knew that we needed to embrace the hard. And that was that point of him teaching us that, which was so necessary. If we can get that point where the hard is necessary and we can embrace it and know that he's going to be with us through it, that on the other side of that hard is so much goodness, is so much greatness. As you said, we wouldn't be who we are today had we not endured that. And I think it also helped, I was thinking as you were talking, that we knew that our marriage was founded also in purpose. It wasn't just this like thing, infatuation. Oh, we're so in love. Like, yes, we had our honeymoon stage, right? We had all those things. But from the top, from the very beginning, what we understood was that our marriage was also founded in purpose. And so it was really easy for me to say that day in your vulnerable moment of like, let's go back. It wasn't really a question for me because I knew that this was a part of our purpose together. And so the foundation of our marriage being in friendship was a very strong point as we shared, but I think it was also that knowing, we knew without a shadow of a doubt that it was also founded in purpose and that God wanted to perform a greater purpose through us together as well. And so it was an easy moment it was hard, but it was an easy thing to say, we have to see this through. And
Yeah, man.
I don't think we ever would have been able to have that moment of realizing that, oh, we actually have permission to explore what a rich marriage looks like had we not done that move.
You know, there's one particular thing that happened around that time as well, shortly after the move, probably about a year or so. Go back, man, before we made the move, it was one of the hardest things for me because I had 2 kids prior to our marriage and 2 sons. So I'm like, oh man, I'm leaving my kids. This can't be your will. How can I leave my children, and be that far away? And so we would have weekends with them and different things. But after the year, I get a phone call from my son's mother, and she's like, the boy's got to be with you. And I'm like, okay. And so I address it with Jennifer, and without a doubt, months later, we had all of our kids, and I have full custody of my oldest sons. For those that are blended families, man, this changed everything. That was part of the thing that put us in counseling. That was part of the process of our marriage, where it was like, well, wait a minute. Now we're parenting all 5 children in the same home together at once, and they're living with us in this new city. And that changed everything. That was so hard and so difficult. That's some of the things in the trials and tribulations we went through. You know, it was very difficult, because now you have 2 different personalities, teenage boys at that, in high school, in our home. And now we're parenting from elementary to middle to high school kids. That's hard on any level, right? So this element of blended families, a lot of people are going through that in marriages, and they don't speak about it. Yeah. They don't talk about it. You know, it's very, very difficult, because you have this different dynamic, and you have all these different children with different personalities. And that affected our marriage majorly. And that thing could have broke us.
Yeah.
That was hard.
I think what the consensus is, when we really think back, is that you can be a blended family and still have a rich marriage.
Yeah.
It's possible. And so that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother time that we promise to share. We have to, but we'll go deeper into that. But yes, the move was definitely prerequisite to us getting to this point and being able to, again, even know that we had the permission. And we want you to know that you have permission. You have permission to dream, to explore, to navigate what it looks like for you to have a rich marriage. And it is possible.
Awesome. Well, thank y'all for tuning in today. Man, we went a little deeper. But appreciate you watching. Please subscribe for the YouTube channel. Please subscribe. We want y'all. We want y'all. We want to build with y'all. Comment, whatever y'all want to do to engage. But we'll continue. We will continue this journey on your rich marriage. Really think about defining what that rich marriage is. We're coming out with a coaching program as well, how to live your rich marriage, customized just for you. And so we'd love to have that conversation as well. But anyway, God bless. Have a good one. Thanks for watching.